Hello everyone, and welcome to Making Monsters, a new series by Sliceprintroleplay. In this series, I'm going to be talking with different artists to get their advice and their tips on making better models, and so that you can get to know the artists behind these cool models. Alright, let's get to it. Okay, so I guess we'll get into this here. I will let you introduce yourself and your Patreon, because I don't want to miss something or mispronounce your name or your Patreon name, which has happened in the past.
I don't really like introducing myself, and I do have a question. I don't really know where to start when people ask me that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. My name is Manuel Boria, and I've been running a business for like 2 years now, almost 2 years. I make miniatures for 3D printing, mostly miniatures. I do a little bit of other things as well. It's mostly minis. And yeah, things have been going pretty smoothly for me. I'm doing this full time now.
Awesome.
So
yeah, I know for...
yeah, that's about it. I don't know.
And what's the name of your Patreon?
The Patreon is Manuel Boria. It's just my name.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing too fancy about it. No fancy name. So people understand that it's just one guy behind it all as well. Sometimes I guess people don't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit of a misconception, especially with a lot of the really, I don't want to say huge, but some of the bigger Patreons out there. You know, they don't realize that there are, you know, sometimes 30, 40 artists that all work on stuff, and they've got promotional teams. And
yeah, I don't know if it's this big. Maybe like for Titan Forge, maybe it's really, really big. Maybe they have been like, I mean, Titan Forge has been there for a very, very long time, making miniatures long before this whole Patreon trend and 3D printing stuff. So
yeah, I
think they have a lot of like freelance contractors that they've been working with for a very long time. It's the same, you know, for Raging Heroes. Like Raging Heroes, I believe, was the former employer of Andrea and Francesca, you know, from Artisan Guild.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. Cast and play is pretty big. I didn't know. Like I believed that. I used to believe the cast and play was like only Alex and his wife, and there's a full team behind them. You know, doing concept art and. Have a dedicated person for pre-supports and all of it. Like it's a company. Like,
yeah.
I was like, okay, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about Patreon, at least for me, is that it allows for smaller, you know, operations, just one or two people to get involved and to be connected with their, you know, their fans and their followers and create some really cool content, and then also be able to expand on that later on. There were a couple of questions that I will pepper in throughout this experience, but I guess first of all,
sure.
I'm going to be learning how to sculpt a little bit at a time when I have free time, which is pretty slim. So what's like what's like your the one thing you wish you would have known when you got started, or what's like a good piece of advice that you think made a big difference for you and would have helped a lot when you first started?
So when I first started sculpting, that was like a very long time ago. That was 10 years ago. I believe like the main thing you need to look into if you want to improve in digital sculpting right away would be to focus on structure, like just basic planes, not really let yourself be overwhelmed by all of the complexity of what it is you're trying to sculpt. Like, see, I'm doing a simple skull at the moment. Mm-hmm. That's a very good exercise. But if you can like think of the skull as this sequence of very simple planes, like I'm doing right now, see, and just memorize that.
Okay.
And go from there, then you're in a very, very good place to just sculpt more complex things, because you're not really thinking about the anatomy at this point. Like you don't know any of the names of the different bones and all that's going on the face. You can just focus on thinking about the nose and thinking of it like a box. It's a box. Okay, like I'm doing the top of the nose and then the sides. on the bottom. So that's just a very simple structure there.
Yeah.
So you don't need to think about like super complex things. You just need to like look at the planes, look how they intersect with each other, even like the forehead. Like you look at this, and you're like, okay, that's interesting. There's that front plane that's really describing a very, very simple wedge shape, like from the bottom view, for instance. So yeah, focusing on structure and try to make simple things, not really trying to do miniatures, for instance. That's too advanced. You need to master just the basic sculpting before trying anything too fancy, because otherwise you'll just get frustrated. Also, you don't even need to start with ZBrush. Like there's very, very cool free alternatives out there. Like Blender is very, very powerful now. And there's also this thing, Sculptress. I don't know if you tried Sculptress.
I looked into it a little bit when you told me about it, but I have not tried it yet.
Well, you need to, because it's very, very simple. You just open it. You can sculpt with with just your mouse and keyboard, just to get a simple feel for it.
Right. So, I'm gonna have a hard time not just watching what you're doing, because I'm super interested in what you're doing. But you said about sculpting, it's just a simple skull, and I was looking at that and realizing that it was coming together from this, amorphous blob. And then I'm seeing now that you're building on that. So you kind of, at least in this exercise, you created yourself the skull as like a wireframe or a foundation to build from. And now you're expanding upon that just by using that simple shape.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was just like goofing around at first, because we were like trying the audio, trying the videos, see about that. So I just started with the skull, but really when I work from reference, for instance, I want to sculpt, I don't know, maybe a goblin or something, and I'm looking at the image. What I'm looking for is really just information on lighting and shadow, just to understand the structure. Like I'm like, okay, this is like very, very, very light, so that means this whole segment is oriented in this direction. Okay, for instance. So. Yeah, like improving your sculpt is about like learning how to look at reference, understanding what's going on the image, and just sculpt that, with simple planes, not focus on like anything fancy like the eyes or anything like that. Just go, think simple.
Yeah.
As you can see, like I can really just go back from the very beginning. That's a sphere, right?
Yeah.
That's really all there is to it. And I started simple. I'm like, okay, this is the eyes, that's the nose, and I already knew I was going to just be making a skull, because that's what I'm most comfortable with when I'm talking with somebody and sculpting at the same time.
Yeah, man. I mean,
because I did that so many times, it's just like a repetition for me at this point.
I mean, I hope that it's just as fascinating for everyone who's watching this, but I'm absolutely enthralled. Like, I love this. I love watching time lapses of sculpts, and I usually get stuck doing it for who knows how long, and then I look up and I realize it's been 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to me, whether it's in a digital application or it's a real world application with clay or whatever it might be. Like seeing that process of watching something go from a pile of raw materials to a refined.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like I feel the same just looking at somebody working from a piece of wood. Sometimes you come across this really cool video of somebody like making something, and you're like, oh, okay, that's how it's made, and you just see this time lapse. And I always get, sucked into them.
Yeah. But this is, I mean, it's fantastic. And my wife is much, much better than she thinks she is. But she's been getting into art lately, and with no small amount of pushing from me. But she's been taking some classes, and we, beginning of the year, I think we got her an art tablet. And I can't even remember what it is at this point. But she's been really having a lot of fun with that. And I'm kind of excited to, it was not intentional, but I'm excited to now maybe usurp that occasionally and use it for my budding sculpting.
That's super cool. But what does she do? Like, does she like draw on Photoshop or something like that?
I actually don't.
Be for drawing, right?
Yeah, I don't know what application she's using right now, but I know that she's She just got past like the basic steps of learning how to create the basic framework for your character, and then working in using finer details. And within, I don't know, it was like an hour, she started and she showed me something, and I was like, oh, it looks really good. And then a couple of minutes or about an hour later, she turned around and she was like, hey, take a look. And like, that's the thing. Like, I think that a lot of people have a misconception about art, that they think that if you can't sit down and draw something out from memory, or that you can't just magically, make something appear, that you're not an artist. But people often don't realize that artists refine their craft too. Like, maybe some people are a little bit more, I don't want to use the word gifted, but maybe they pick up on things a little easier. Maybe they just can conceptualize
learning how to
things.
produce art, that's a very, and it's true for, I'd say, any kind of art, like learning how to draw, learning how to play the piano, or any kind of that requires practice all the time.
Yeah,
and it requires a lot of studying as well. Like, I mean, I've studied anatomy for more than 10 years now, and I'm still even scratching the surface at this point. Like the more you learn, the more you realize just how much you didn't know, and how much there is to, like, it never ends, this thing. You never really reach a point when you're like, okay, I know everything now. No, you never know everything.
Yeah.
There's always more. There's always more. And I think that's what makes creating art so interesting. Like, there's always something new around the corner for you to study and get a feel for. Like, I mean, even visual arts. There's structure, like I told you about, like understanding lighting and shadow.
Yeah.
And then there's like anatomy, which is a completely different field. There's composition. There's all these art fundamentals, and they all apply to 2D and 3D.
Yeah.
The exact same way. So yeah, like that's people not always realize that it's not about being gifted a lot at all. Like, there's a lot of studying.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I'm only just recently coming to realize myself, is that, I've sat down to, to sketch something out, or even if it's just a simple idea, and, I'll sketch it out, and I use simple stick figures because that's what I know. And, I think, oh man, like I'm never going to be able to improve this, this whole art thing. I don't have that artistic ability. But even if you feel that way, there's always something that you can improve upon by just spending some time learning it. Like, you can at least try. Because like I said, like with my wife, like she started and she had something that was pretty good. It was rough, but it was pretty good. And then by the end of it, she had something that was really polished and great. And it took her an hour of study to go from something that was decent, certainly better than I could have done, to something that was fantastic. Like, it was, looking 10 times better. And that was with an hour of study, an hour of, one-on-one with, well, maybe not one-on-one, but watching a class. And it makes a huge difference. So I think that one of the biggest things for me, and I think with other people when it comes to modeling, is that a lot of people get overwhelmed because they don't immediately see some tangible results. And you might not, it might take 10, 50 attempts for you to, see something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at, and that's the reason why it's so important for you to show work in progress, even to your community. Yeah. Like, I do it all the time. Just to show them that, okay, this is my step one. I might change my mind about this. This is a blob. I don't even know what that is. And they're like, okay, that's cool. Like, there's this whole process going on. And like, the guy does not even really know what he's doing at this point. I'm very, very forthright about this. Like, sometimes I change my mind like 2 or 3 times, even sometimes 10 or 20 hours into a sculpt. So that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, not necessarily, like I said, not with art so much, but I've definitely had that experience with, projects. Like, I'll start creating something, whether it's a simple desk or a table or some weird idea that I've had, because I've always pretended that I'm some kind of an engineer. So I'll get into a project and then I'll get halfway through it and I'm like, what if I just made this a little longer here and I put a hinge on it and then I'm able to do this, and then the entire project changes. So you never know when you'll get inspiration and something, you might try a new technique, or you might look at a different reference material or whatever it might be, and it might change the entire project. And you might be able to use what you've already started with, or you might, want to start over, whatever it might be. And I love that flexibility. And for me, my, my artistic outlet has always been writing and world building, which is why I loved
Nice.
being a DM when I got into it, because I was able to create this entire world. And that's actually what got me into 3D printing in the first place, was
Yeah.
wanting to be able to
Okay,
create
cool.
minis, exactly, what this all is. And it's been the most amazing experience, like getting to know artists like you, and talking with people. And it's such a great community, and there's so many different
I agree,
facets
yeah.
of it. It's like you were talking about with art, like there's so many different areas, like there's so many different things you can get into, whether it's filament-based printing or resin-based printing, whatever it might be. Like there's so many different avenues that you can get into, and so many different materials and techniques, and it's amazing. And it all kind of comes together. For me, 3D printing is an amazing tool that I use for bringing more life and more realism to my D&D table. But for other people, 3D printing is, an outlet for their art or whatever it might be. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Like this is what I like the most. I think one of the things I like the most about 3D printing is realizing just how many uses you have for this new technology. Like not everybody purchase your products, if you're making products like me, for the same reasons. Like sure, I have a lot of people who get my stuff because they have particular needs for their D&D games, or even like Frostgrave games or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's just because they like it, and they want to print it maybe 10 times bigger than it's planned for, and just paint it. And sometimes they're just like using some of my baby monsters for like printing toys for their children, for instance. There's that too. And then it's super fun, like seeing all these people that you just get to talk to, like I mentioned in another interview that I had with Cast and Play a couple of weeks back. I forgot what I was saying. I think. Yeah, well, that happens.
That'll come back.
Sculpting at the same time.
But yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing avenue to meet so many cool people, and that's a really, really good point too, is that, I know people who will subscribe to Patreons, and they have no intention of printing the models for tabletop gaming. They print the models because they want to make a diorama or something like that. And I think that's really cool. And like, that's their artistic expression, is that they use these models, and they might kit bash them with other pieces that they print out. They might kit bash them digitally. They might do something totally different, and then they create this diorama that they've had in their mind for a while, and they make these little sets. And like, it's really, really cool. And it's kind of like,
super rewarding for an artist as well. Like seeing your thing having so many uses. Like at one point, like when I sculpted this thing for 3D printed tabletop, the Lost Adventures Kickstarter.
Yeah.
There were these owl bears that I was asked to sculpt, and some guy printed them at like very, very small size, and he made an amazing diorama with just this owl bear being attacked by a bunch of guys in the woods.
Yeah.
And and that was awesome. I was like, wow, there's so many potential for what we do, and we get to talk to these people, like, and they get to talk to us. We know each other, at one point. And that's really fun, like, because now I have a very different kind of relationship to my work. Like it's a lot more social than what I used to do when I was working in video games. Like you don't get to talk to the people who enjoy the product that you've been making all this time, because video game production, that takes like 2-3 years sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But here it's very different. You just make a 3D model, and you show a work in progress of it, and people get all excited, and they can print it and show you pictures. That's like, it's so different, and it's so much better. Yeah,
you have that feedback that comes in so much faster, or like you said with video games, maybe not at all, where you'll hear feedback maybe from critics later on or something like that. But but I actually did not know that about you, and that's awesome. So did you used to sculpt for like a studio, or was it like a specific company that you worked with?
I worked for a bunch of different companies, in fact, but that was like between 2012 and 2018. That's when I stopped completely working on video game projects. Like I did a little bit of teaching as well between 2012 and 2017.
Okay.
I was teaching at different schools, like how to sculpt. how to deal with topology for animation and games and stuff like that. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Nothing famous, nothing fancy.
I mean, I think your stuff's pretty fancy, personally. But yeah, I mean, it's another really good point, is that a lot of people don't realize. In fact, I just saw someone asking about this. They took they ripped a game model right from one of the many different sites that are out there where you can just grab 3D models from the games, and they imported it into their slicer, and they were like, well, why can't I just print this? It's a 3D model. But the fact is that the models that are made for video games are not necessarily, or very often aren't, made with the intention of it being a physical, tangible object. So a lot of times there's some work that needs to be done to make those objects a real physical thing that you can print out. So there's even right there, like, there's a huge difference between, you know, you might even be able to consider it as two sides of the same coin, but even then it's kind of a stretch, because, you know, when you're sculpting for one application, there are very specific goals that you have in mind versus a different application where your goals are completely different. They're entirely flipped. And it's crazy just how much fine detail that goes into, you know, these different applications, you know, video game models versus 3D printed models.
Yeah. And I mean, there are bridges, you know, between all these things. Like, I'm able to do this whole sculpting 3D printing because I have this whole experience in video games. We use the same tools, but in the end, like it's like you said, if you extract something from a video game and try to print it, you're not gonna have something as detailed, because all of the details that you see on video game models, that's because they have textures. We don't have any texture. It's just like 3D information. There's no color. There's nothing. So when you extract the mesh itself, like the file, you basically see the polygons. And that's all you see. And if you try to print that, it's going to look like all faceted and weird, even the high res stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a very different thing. But if you could somehow get one of the sculpt files that was used before the retopology thing, when you have all this faceted stuff, because you need to have low level of polygons if you're doing a model for a game, for a video game. Whereas for 3D printing, like your count, your point count, or your polygon counts, it can be really high. You know, you can print something that's like 500,000 polygons, no problem. You could not have such a high res thing in a video game. That would crash immediately. Right. You can't display that. So yeah, I can understand the frustration from somebody who tried to print something that's extracted from a game, but you could still use it as a base. Like, if you know how to sculpt, there's nothing really stopping you from taking any kind of 3D resource that you can find and just work from there. It's actually not very hard to do.
Yeah, that's a great idea and a great reference. My main use for it, I think I was helping somebody do it. I don't even remember now, like 6 months ago at least. But I was using just Mesh Mixer. It's kind of my go-to program. It's what I've used for a while. It's what I know. And I ended up using the Make Solid tool and getting as close as I could and explaining that, like, you know, there's still some work to be done, because you can't really fill in all these gaps and make it ready for 3D printing and not lose some detail. So you kind of have to go back in and resculpt it. If that's something that you're able to do, to go back in and refine some of the edges and put some of that detail back into it, then so much the better. But yeah, it can definitely be a process. But it's a great piece of advice to take something from a game like that and then fix it and use it as a reference for your, you know, whatever you're trying to model.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I would absolutely encourage people to do that. Like, if they want to get started and just have fun, like maybe they got their hands on Blender and they try to do a little bit of sculpting, and why not start from a pre-existing model? Yeah. After all, if it's just for themselves, like they don't intend to sell it after the fact, and sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yeah, that's something that we should probably touch on real quick, is that if you're going to take game models from a company, from a pre-established company, and you're going to take something that's made by somebody else that is not your property, you can't just sell it. So just quick disclaimer
just
there.
to make sure you can't do that.
Yeah, no, it's actually something that I have and will continue to ban people that I find selling material that isn't theirs or selling material that they don't have the rights to sell, because it's something that I become really good friends with a lot of different artists, and I really respect what you guys are doing, and I think that it's a really frustrating thing for me and a really disrespectful thing that I hate seeing when somebody buys a model and then they're like, oh yeah, just message me and I'll send it to you, and like I see that, and just there's nothing I can do about it on other people's pages, but on my page, like it's not okay. So there's a warning for you. If you guys want to join my page, you should, because there's a lot of cool people on there, but that doesn't fly there. But so like I said, there was a couple of questions that I wrote out just because I do tend to get into the habit of just kind of watching somebody work and completely getting distracted. So I wrote myself a couple of questions just to ask as we were moving along. So you kind of already answered how you think people should get started. You said that Blender, which I've heard that from a lot of people, Blender is a good place to start because it's gotten a lot more powerful recently. And there's also a ton of reference material out there. There's a ton of really great YouTube channels, and there's different courses you can find and take, and there's a good amount of reference there. It's a good place to start. I have heard a lot of people say that it's more of a stepping stone, at least for 3D modeling for printing, just because it's can be a little bit restricting when you start to get up into some of the more detailed sculpts. And that's way, way above my skill level, but I can understand that. As I know most of the people that I talk to who do this for a living, or who make consistent models, they don't use Blender. I think the only artist that I know of that uses Blender pretty much exclusively for their models is just Miguel Zavala. As far as I know, I think that's the only artist that I know of, and that's awesome. If it works for you.
I think there's a reason for that. That's because most of us that do that now, we're used to using ZBrush, and we're just too lazy to learn how to use Blender, and we paid for it. We know how to use it, so we use it. We have it. But really, I think that if you really look into look at the two programs in terms of technical power, I believe that really there's nothing you can do in ZBrush that you cannot do in Blender. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's it's something that I will probably start with, just because, like I said, I had gotten in my head I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago that I was going to start making video games, back when I thought that I had enough time to learn how to do that. But learning how to make a video game from scratch on your own is a very, very time-consuming process.
Oh, yes, it is. Video games are crazy, man.
So, you have to come up with writing the code for it, creating the models, creating animations, creating all of the user interface information. You have to basically do all of this, even if it's a simple game for just like a phone game, which is tends to be a little bit more simple than a larger platform game, but still. So at that time, I'd gotten some really cool classes that I enjoyed watching and taking for Blender. So that's probably where I'll start. Also, one nice thing about Blender is that it is free, which I am not a rich man, so as much as I would love to use what everyone else does, or what a lot of the other artists use, I do think that Blender is I think it's a really cool resource, and I'm excited to hear you say that it's something that can be used professionally and can continue to be useful even after you get to the point where you want to branch out and start making things a little bit more detailed and going for different techniques and stuff.
Sorry, I'm just a little focused, man.
That's no problem.
On this one part.
I am, like I said, I will, more often than not, I will get sucked into what you're doing too.
That's what editing is for.
We'll see. I might be too lazy.
We'll see.
But it's just like, it's so cool to me that you started out with just a simple sphere 20 minutes ago, and
that was 20 minutes ago. I lost track.
I don't know. I was guessing. It might be longer than that.
You know what? I think I'll have a cigarette right now. So I'll just pull couple of copies in there, and we'll just talk for a little bit.
That sounds fine. So one of the other things I was going to ask you is, this may be something that you know off the top of your head. It might not, but what are some of the pieces of equipment that you would recommend for people who are getting into this that maybe aren't looking at making this a profession or doing this as anything other than a hobby, but would definitely help them out? Like, I know that a lot of people have said that an art pad can tend to be an invaluable tool when you start learning how to do this, because it is a much more fluid motion and it can be a lot simpler.
And I would be absolutely correct in saying that. Like, I'd say basically trying to sculpt something using your mouse, just your mouse and keyboard, that would drive you crazy. That'd be like trying to do, I don't know, brain surgery using, I don't know, a fork and a knife. Yeah, it's not really adapted.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all there is to it, really. But you don't need anything fancy. Like, don't get yourself something as expensive as like $100. You can have something really, really good for just $50, really.
Okay.
Yeah. What I'm using right now is a simple $50 Wacom tablet.
I actually do know
fancy
that name.
To it.
That was, I think that might be the tablet that I got from my wife.
It probably is, because that's the best brand. Don't get anything Chinese. There's this one company that's been doing it for decades, so yeah, use that.
Awesome. I will definitely keep that in mind. I'm a big proponent of learning on something that fits your budget, because if it's going to take you 6 months to save up the money to buy something that you think is, the best of the best, or even mid-range, because you can spend thousands of dollars on art equipment easily.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think that it's really great advice to hear that you don't need to wait weeks and weeks and weeks and save up, every penny that you can to buy something that's going to be $500-600. You can get something that you can start with now, and then if you need to, you can bump up later, which it's great to hear that that's not something that necessarily need to do. Yeah.
You don't need anything fancy. I mean, I've been using that kind of tablet for a very long time. It's pretty small. It's like and it's very solid too. Like, I mean, it's like the Nokia 3310 of tablets. You can do whatever with it and it still works. There's no like buttons or anything. It's just a very simple thing, and you can do that with it. So it's like, yeah, you don't need anything fancy.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the coolest things. My older brother does. He's one of those most infuriating people where he can look at something and deconstruct it, and even if it's a new art style, he can learn how to do it in like 2 or 3 days, and he can reproduce it. So
that's nice.
He's ridiculous. But I love him. Obviously, he's my brother. But if I could murder him and take his power, I would seriously consider it. But anyway, he was using an art pad at one point, and I was watching him. Same kind of thing. Watching him go from a rough draft to something amazing, and I remember him telling me that he could use different pressures to get different types of effects on what he was working with, and that blew my mind. And in one example, he was able to show me how an art pad can really be a huge help for 3D art and 2D art, whatever. But also, I'm sure it's the same with sculpting, is that you can use different points of pressure to create a softer or harder effect depending on what you're using.
Exactly, yeah.
And that alone, I mean, that, like I said, just that alone makes it 100 times more useful than a mouse. Not that you can't start with a mouse. I've done.
You can absolutely start with a mouse. I mean, I could sculpt something with a mouse because I have some sort of idea what I'm doing, know, but I wouldn't get any of that pressure sensitivity that you get out of a tablet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't be as precise. It would take a lot longer, but I'd still be able to do it. So I'd say if you wanna try it out, just download Sculptress. Get it. It's free. It's super simple to use. A lot simpler than Blender or ZBrush. It's like only dedicated to sculpting. Mm-hmm. And there's like maybe 10 buttons, and that's it. You don't need to learn anything fancy to use it. You can use it right away, and just see if you like it. Like, get a feel for it. Just use your mouse just to rotate around the sphere, sculpt a little bit, see if you like it, and yeah, if you do, like, I'd say $50 is really worth the investment if you want to get a small tablet. Simple one, really, like simple bamboo pen will do the trick. You don't need something super big and super fancy. Just get something cheap and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I had something a similar experience when I first started creating YouTube videos, where I had it in my head, okay, I got to get really expensive lights, and I gotta set aside like $1,000 to create this perfect setup. And then at one point, I got really great advice from somebody who had been creating Twitch content for a long time, and really good friend of mine, and he was like, look, if you keep focusing on getting the perfect setup and the perfect equipment, you're never going to create anything, and
that's true.
You're never going to get anywhere. So if you want to start, then you should start with what you have and do the best you can, and as you hit that ceiling of what your current equipment can give you, and you start to learn new techniques, then you can start upgrading one piece at a time. And that is
very, very good advice.
It was the most phenomenal advice that I've gotten. And I just recently started to increase some of my home studio setup equipment, and it was perfectly fine. Like I don't remember, but maybe 15 or 20 videos right now, so it's fairly small. But I'm starting to learn how to do some new techniques and started bringing in new lighting and things like that, and it's been really helpful to my channel to be able to start at a certain point and build, instead of worrying about getting the perfect stuff at first and waiting an extra 6 months to a year to start something. So I think that's phenomenal advice.
I think it applies. Yeah, it applies to just about anything, really.
Yeah.
It's like you want to learn how to play basketball. You don't need an amazing pair of sneakers. Like you can do it. Really, like
yeah,
you don't need any of that fancy stuff. And I mean, 3D modeling has become something really super accessible right now. Like when I started, man, that was really, really hard. I mean, ZBrush was only getting started. And we had to like learn how to use 3D Studio Max and Maya and that kind of stuff. And there was no real 3D sculpting back then. It was only just starting out. So really, it costs nothing to just have a go at it now, because we have all these amazing programs like Sculptress. Like that one thing appeared in 2011 or 10, I think. So before that was the dark ages, man.
Yeah. And I mean, that again, that could be said about so many different things. You look at just computers themselves, like every 2.5 to 5 years, we have some massive shift in computing technology, and things become so incredibly involved and so incredibly different and more powerful. And for the most part, the base idea of a computer is still the same, but how we get to the end result is so different and so much more expanded upon than it was just a couple of years ago. And that's amazing. Like video editing software, I remember back in the day when video editing software it didn't exist. When the best you could do was cut something from one frame to another frame. That was it. I think that it is, well, I shouldn't say it didn't exist, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember that video editing software wasn't something you could just get. I'm old enough that I can remember what it was like before the internet was a thing. I'm also old enough that I can remember what it was like, and you creating the tusks made me think of it, what it was like to be playing online, to play something like Warcraft online, and then hear a phone call.
Yeah, even that was amazing. Wow, I can play with somebody else.
Yeah.
He's not even there. That's amazing. I remember that too. Like, I don't know, how old are you, man?
I am 30, almost 31-ish. I don't know.
Okay.
Somewhere
almost the same age then.
Yeah. That's awesome. But I mean, it was such a cool experience to and like thinking back on it, it blows my mind, and I hope that I'm not the only one, but like I think back on like where I was at, when I was like 10-ish playing Diablo 2 and how amazing that was, and that game was phenomenal, and now I look back on it and I still love that game, but I can kind of look back on it and do my best to take off those nostalgia goggles, and then you can kind of see you can't even play the game in full screen mode on 1080. Like you have to crop it down, and like it's amazing to go back and see how far technology has come. And that's and you touched on this earlier, at least a little bit, and I totally agree. I think it's super important to keep the first thing that you've worked on, whether it's the first successful model that you printed or the first thing you painted. I think that it's an extremely useful tool to help you stay motivated and help you get excited about something and to see where you've come from. Because like I have, the character on my channel, kind of my mascot. His name's Oram. He was an NPC. He was the first NPC I created, and he was the first 3D model that I had printed. And it wasn't great. I looked back at it recently, and I was like, I can see where I could have done better here. And that's the thing, is that like I could have done better at the time, but at the time I got something really great, and it was the best that I could do. And now I can look back on that and see where I've come from. So when I'm getting frustrated,
see how far you've come.
Yeah,
really. There's something very, very satisfying about it. Like really comparing yourself to who you were yesterday, what you were capable of, just how far you've come.
And it can be the best thing in the world. Like, when you're having a hard time, especially when it's something, like 3D printing, where, you go to try something, a new material, a new technique, a new model, whatever it might be. And it's a difficult process, and you fail, 1, 2, 10 times, whatever it might be. And you're starting to get really frustrated. And I have the character flaw of getting really down on myself and thinking, oh, well, like maybe I shouldn't do this anymore. Like, I guess I can't make this happen.
Oh no.
And then you go back and you look at that model and you see what you started with versus what you're trying to do now, and you see that it's 1,000 times more difficult, more involved, and it can be a really positive experience, at least for me, to have that and be able to look back on it and realize that maybe you're being a little hard on yourself, and you have accomplished a lot and have a real physical, tangible thing you can look at. So you had said earlier about changing things as you're moving and being able to do in progress shots and be able to let people know what you're working on. And I think that's a great idea. And along those same lines, like I said, I think keeping the first things that you've worked on is really important, because it can be a really positive experience and a really positive tool to be able to help you whenever you're having a hard time with something, in my opinion.
That's true. I have no idea what I'm doing right now.
I don't either.
But I'll get there.
I'm happy to be along for the ride. And that's the coolest thing about fantasy, is that like you can do whatever you want. Like, and there's a good chance that somebody out there will really enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And this is what I like about the lores that we work from. Like, especially when you're doing fantasy. There's so many cool fantasy lores to take inspiration from. Like, there's not just D&D. Like, there's so many things out there. I mean, there's Final Fantasy, right? There's stuff like Chrono Trigger. There's Warhammer Fantasy as well. Like I'm doing right now. I mean, I'm working on these Dark Knights. That's definitely a lot more Warhammer Fantasy than it is D&D. But the cool thing about Dungeons and Dragons is that it's a pen and paper things, and you can do whatever you want. Like, even if you like a miniature, even if it doesn't really represent anything from the D&D lore itself, that's okay. You can just like come up with some cool homebrew and make it into an NPC just because you like the miniature, and you want to print it and play with it. So yeah, I mean, I want to try different things now, because like D&D might be a little bit too limiting, I guess, at times. And you're like, maybe I don't want to do that. I'd like to try my own thing. And this is what's so cool about this whole new Patreon ecosystem, is that in the end, you decide what it is you want to sculpt. So it's nothing like working for a company.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's like the guys over at Titan Forge. They're employees,
Yeah.
They basically do what they're told. But when you have your own Patreon, then you can just decide to, like, okay, fuck that, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to try something else this month. I don't know.
Yeah, you get your artistic freedoms and your artistic liberties, quite literally. because it's your art, it's your expression, and people will support you because they enjoy it, and people who don't enjoy it will. And that was something to me that I didn't realize people did. I only just started recently supporting Patreons a couple months ago, and I saw someone comment and they were like, I'm not really interested in next month, so I think I'm gonna pause for a bit. And I was devastated for the artist. I was like, oh no, like he's, someone's leaving his support, and or his.
Well, that happens all the time.
And then a couple weeks later, he released a promotional shot for what he was doing the month after that, and that same person was like, oh, I really like that, I think I'm going to come back for this month. And I was like, oh, okay, so there's like an ebb and a flow to things where people have choice too. Just like the artist can choose that they're doing something different and trying something different, they might bring in 5 or 10 people who like that where they didn't like the previous work, and those people might not like the next thing, and vice versa. And I think that that's a really cool. You use the word ecosystem. I think that's a great example where you have this sort of ebb and flow, just like, things growing and dying and evolving into something else. And I think that's a really cool way of looking at it, because it's sort of the same thing that happens here where, an artist might try something totally different and completely reinvent their style and do something like, like Space Marines or spaceships. And that's super cool. And then, the next month they might try to do, giant kaiju style Godzilla monsters, and that's sort of
because they just feel like it.
Yeah.
Because why not?
Yeah. And that's I love the freedom that it gives to people, because I've definitely been in that situation where I've had to do things that I didn't necessarily want to because it was my job or because I had to, and there's a huge difference between doing something that you have to because you for financial reasons or, whatever it might be, versus something that you want to do and get to do because it's your choice. And there's just I think that the end result usually shows that, when somebody's really passionate about something and they can really work at something that is their own expression, I think that the end result can really be telling of, it really shows their passion in something. So I really appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's something I guess that a lot of Patreon artists need to know. They need to listen to to what we're saying right now, because a lot of them get burned out, because of the output.
Yeah.
Of models that they need to put out every month, and at some point they just get really tired of it. And I think that's because they don't really enjoy doing what they're doing. If you're really passionate about something, I don't know if it does that to you, but your energy is just so flowing. Like you can work 10 hours straight on something you love,
yeah,
and just procrastinate like crazy when you don't. And I think one of the main reasons to get burned out is this one. When you're an artist, is because you're trying to please people, or trying to do what everybody else does just because you're trying to get some of that nice Patreon money, but really there's no enjoyment in it. Yeah. And I think it's important to keep enjoying what you do. Lately I haven't really been enjoying what I was doing this much, and that's the reason why I was like, okay, what do you want to do? Okay, I want to work on this. Okay, it's your Patreon, man. Do your thing. Really, don't worry. Don't listen to these 400 people, because you will never be able to satisfy 400 people the same way. That's impossible. So people will leave, they'll come back. Just make sure you enjoy the process, that you like the models you produce, because otherwise you will get burned out, and things will only get worse from there.
Yeah. That's awesome advice for anyone in any industry, and it happens to me. Where a couple months ago there was this big push, and mono screen technology became the big thing that everyone was excited about learning about, and I was fortunate enough to win a mono screen printer from Elegoo, and I was super excited about it. And
nice.
I got it, and I immediately started testing with it, and I was having failures with it, and I was having issues, and I was so focused on getting this content made that I wasn't even going through the basic rudimentary steps that I know, because I've been doing this long enough, and I was skipping a lot of things and doing really sloppy work. And eventually I realized that I'm trying to chase a trend that most likely by the time I get this content up, people have already had access to this printer for weeks, and I'm going to lose out on it anyway. So I think that remembering to focus on doing the things that you want to do, because honestly, I like doing reviews. It's fun, but I'll do them on my own schedule. And if people find value from it, in 6 months from now, or, when I release it, or 6 months from now, whatever it might be, then that's great. But I'm not doing it because it's the most popular thing right now. I'm doing it because it's something that I happen to have and I wanted to try, and I'll give people my thoughts on. So I think that that's really good advice. And I think that people should try to remember that when you start to find that working on something is a chore, that maybe you should reevaluate what you're doing, and if you can maybe try to find a way to bring that passion back a little bit and either change it up or try an entirely different medium. It might be that maybe sculpting for 3D printing is not really exciting, or you're having a difficult time with it, or whatever it might be. So maybe try to move on to something different, and maybe try sculpting houses or something, or whatever it might be. I don't know. That's probably a bad example. But,
yeah.
Just in general, I hate seeing people lose motivation for something they're passionate about because it became a chore. And I hate seeing that. So I think that's really good advice.
But then again, things becoming chore and requiring work will always be there. But
that's true.
But still, it's always good to remember, where you started and why it was exciting in the first place.
Yeah.
And just, if you remember that, you can only make good choices, I think, because you will be able to set yourself back on track.
Yeah. You'll right the ship. I'm really liking this, the way it's coming out. And I
have no idea what I'm doing. Again, making it up as I go.
Yeah.
That's how I do things.
Letting the inspiration.
Sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not uncommon for me to get into a project and change halfway through. So
yeah,
I totally get it.
Yeah, he's perfect. He looks so stupid. This is what I was looking for. All right, that's pretty cool. Okay.
I like it. So, there was something else I was going to ask you about, but I lost it. Oh, okay. If you were working on something, as you were going to put into a release or something, what's your general time frame? And maybe you don't necessarily think about it this way, but what's from your perspective and in your professional capacity, if you started on a model start to finish, about how long do you think you would work on something that's like a normal humanoid size model, something that's 6 feet tall?
I'd say it depends. It's roughly a week. I'd say it's
Okay.
somewhere between 5 to 10 days for some of the most complex. It depends, because you never really know what you're going to struggle on. Generally, artists know themselves well enough to know what they should not try to do because they failed before and they know they don't like doing a certain thing.
Right.
Like I'm realizing right now that I kind of struggle doing what we call hard surface stuff, like pieces of armor, stuff like, equipment, swords, shields. So some artists are really, really good at that because they have tons of references and they just enjoy the process of modeling them. But for something more organic, like what I did on the turtles, for instance, there's almost no hard surface modeling on them, except on the Artificer. That was full hard surface stuff, and he's more he's more futuristic in his design. Mm-hmm. So it requires extra care, on the shapes, making sure everything is super, super clean. Whereas if you're doing I don't know, something like a druid, for instance, you're gonna have more organic elements like feathers, I don't know, robes and stuff like that. So that takes more time. But generally, like something like a 32 millimeter miniature, simple one. Like if I were to make this guy into a folk actor, I don't know, that could take up to a week, I'd say. Okay. That's because I'm very nitpicky. Like I want to find a cool pose. I want to find interesting design, nice composition, and making sure everything is clean. So just cleaning itself is very long. That can take like up to 2 days sometimes. And that's because my process is very like a free form. I don't really follow any kind of super specific pipeline for my miniatures. Sometimes I draw a character in Photoshop and go from there. Sometimes I just like start in 3D right away. Sometimes I have no idea what I'm doing. I just like pick up a sphere and start sculpting, and I end up with something. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That could be like a nice shade for a helmet or something. So yeah, it's not like Cast and Play. They have concept artists, for instance. So they're only dedicated to designing the characters, but they don't make the models, right? They only make like 2D sketches and little indications. So it's mostly 2D work. But from my part, it's like when you're on your own designing miniatures from scratch, you're really doing something that's midway between character modeling, character design, and character animation, and you got to figure out what to do with these three things at the same time.
Right.
So sometimes it can be very, very long when you don't really know what to do with the pose. For instance, you don't really know what to do with this piece of design that you've been struggling with sometimes for days. You're like, oh my god, there's something very wrong, about this shape over there. What should I do with this? Oh, this area is a little bit bland, and maybe it requires more detail. And so yeah, that's just my process is very, very weird and erratic. That's still how I do things, and that's generally a week.
Okay,
I'd say.
I mean, I think that makes sense, and that's something that I wanted to ask, because I think a lot of people misunderstand, or rather, they don't understand the requirement for something like this. They might think that you can whip something out in a couple of hours, and maybe you can, but it's not going to be.
You can, but it kind of depends just how far you want to go. Like this head, for instance, I could clean that up real quick, export it, and make it into some kind of kit bashing bit. Why not? If that's what I do. But if I want to do like a full model, super detailed, and all of that, that takes much, much more time.
Yeah, and it's funny you said about cleaning, because it's exactly what I thought of as soon as you said that you can get really obsessed with it, because that's I don't clean super often because I have two small children and there seems to be no point. But the times when I do clean and I really get into it, man, like it's amazing how you can start, like you'll grab a screwdriver and a paper towel and start cleaning like the in-between tile on the floor, and you realize, oh man, I didn't realize how dirty this was, and then you get into something else, and then 5 hours have passed, and you realize that.
And it's like this episode in Malcolm in the Middle. When the more you clean, the more stuff there is to clean.
Yeah. And then, the kitchen looks amazing, and it's sparkles everywhere you look, and you have 2 trash bags full of different cleaning materials, and no paper towels left in the house. But yeah, I assume that it's a very similar process, and I could see myself doing that same thing where, I'd get in and be like, okay, like I want to make this line a little bit sharper here, and I want to soften this one here. And then, zooming out and realizing that I was spending that long on, what equates to being like 2 millimeters of a model. Yeah, I could definitely see that. I am really liking the way this is coming together. And I think that it's...
Let's give that guy a neck. Yeah, there you go. Okay. I know something was missing. There you go.
Yeah, that brings it all together.
Let's make a bust. Yeah, let's get back to symmetry. There you go. And maybe like I can export this and you can make it available to your patrons.
I mean, if that's what you want to do, I'm totally up with that.
No problem. I'm not going to do anything with this, I think, but it's still there, so I don't know.
Sure. I mean, I think that would be great. And I am blown away by what you were able to do at this point in under an hour. This looks amazing. And that's obviously just the mark of someone who has spent this long refining their craft. Which is why I think that's why I think it's so important to do these kinds of, casual interviews, as I called it. Because I think a lot of people, like I said, they get a misunderstanding about this, and they see the art that like people like you are able to produce, and they don't realize maybe how long you've been doing it, or how much time it takes. And, they don't realize that what you can do in an hour now is something that would have taken you, I don't know, 6 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, 5-6 years ago, because you learn all these different techniques and all these different things that you start to hone your craft after a while. And I think that, and I might be projecting a little bit on people, but I know when I first started supporting Patreons, I was seeing this stuff, and, I was seeing people who were my age and younger, and it's completely narcissistic to look at somebody and think like, wow, they're younger than me and they can do something that's this amazing. And like, they might've studied this for 5 years before they started this Patreon, so it's not like somebody just picked this up yesterday and they were like, you know what, I'm pretty good at this, I think I'll start a Patreon. It's something they've been doing for a long time, and maybe there are some people who do that. It's possible. But I think it's really gonna be a cool experience, at least I hope, for people to stumble upon this video and think, start to realize what it takes and what goes into a lot of this stuff. And also,
and again, I was able to do it pretty fast because it's just a head, and the heads,
right.
When doing that, you have access to stuff like symmetry. I mean, I started with symmetry, right? Whatever I was doing on one side was replicated on the other side. But like when you're doing a pose and full design and you're trying to figure out what to do with the sword, what to do with this, and then it becomes like endless at one point. But doing this one simple organic thing, that's just a couple hours generally.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's, again, like it's something that I've come to learn recently just from talking with different artists. But a lot of people don't think about the fact that the pose for a model can often take, a day to decide on, or more.
Yes.
Because coming up with a pose, because what you're trying to do a lot of times is you're trying to show physical motion in a motionless object. And that is way harder than it sounds, to make something look organic and make something look like it has physical movement. Because even if you haven't studied anatomy, even if you haven't studied martial arts or horseback riding or fencing or whatever it might be, you can still look at something and your brain knows on some level that something doesn't look right, but it can't always figure out what it is. And that's because the motion that a model might be portraying doesn't look like it was generated correctly.
Yes.
A lot of times, one thing I see a lot is balance. I took martial arts for a really long time because I was obsessed with it. But for me, I look at a model and sometimes I have to remind myself that it's a fantasy world, but like there'll be a certain movement and the balance doesn't look right to me. Like, cause the sword is very large and way off center, and that model looks like a chicken
I see what you mean.
Tipping over, so that's one that kicks off for me immediately when I look at a model is, I'll be really impressed by it, and it's still impressive, and I'm not trying to knock anything that somebody's done, but I think that a lot of people don't realize how much time goes into making a pose look lifelike and portray an action or portray something more than just a character standing with its arms at its sides, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you want to make it look lifelike, then you're getting into an entirely different world.
Absolutely. And even making something as simple as just like you just said, a simple warrior like holding his equipment on the side of his body. The hard part is making this simple thing look lifelike. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like
making something like that's something people may not realize, but when I don't really know what to do with a character design, my go-to solution is generally like making a super dynamic pose to counterbalance the fact that I don't to make up for the fact that I don't know what I'm doing with the design. So I'm trying to overcompensate with a super dynamic pose, but making a super dynamic pose look like lifelike is actually a lot easier than making something more static look like lifelike. And
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna attempt to elaborate, and this will determine whether or not I have any idea of what you're talking about. But for example, like the model that you created here rather than just creating a mugshot, basically, you've created something that kind of has an expression. Like he kind of looks like he with a little bit more tweaking, you could make him look surprised, or you could make him look angry, or you could make him look like he's, mid war cry or something. I'm saying he, but it could be she, who knows?
Could be she.
But that totally makes sense, because it's a lot easier to create a something that has motion, that is in the act of stabbing or firing an arrow or whatever it might be, because there is a physical thing that draws your eye and you can kind of identify with, versus something that is standing there stirring a pot of soup or something, giving them some kind of an expression that you can kind of identify with. That totally makes sense to me. But just not a disclaimer, I don't know what the word that I'm looking for is. A general heads up, I guess, to anyone watching this or listening. My intention with this series, and I think that we've definitely come a long way, is to give people a chance to get to know all of these really great artists, and to kind of get an idea of their process, and let you know that if you're starting to get into modeling, that this is something that is achievable, but that you kind of need to know where to start, and to set your expectations, and also to kind of see some really cool art come together, because there is a lot to it. And I hope that this has been a cool experience for you, because it's certainly been for me. But just to me, it's so fascinating to see all of this come together, and to see it, like I said, go from a sphere to this, and it's in an hour like that. It blows me away every time.
So yeah, as you can see, just doing this right now, just rotating, that one part,
mm-hmm.
and suddenly something's going on. Because the torso is going in this direction, but the head is going in a different one. So you have this little, and all of a sudden it's a little bit more interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Rather than this, which is just a bust. When you do this, all of a sudden it's a living thing.
Yeah. It shows some kind of a.
And he's like, "What the hell?
Yeah.
What did I just hear? What was that?"
It does. That's kind of how to me, it looks like a sort of a surprise reaction, or an upset reaction, like someone walking into its camp. Every D&D group that I've ever run would immediately attack it and not ask questions. Because that's something, just a quick PSA about D&D. Not everything is out to kill you guys. Sometimes you can have conversations with it first. It's fantasy world. Oh man, that's so cool. Oh, that's awesome. See, because that's why I think that I hope that this series is going to be fun for other people to watch too, because I am definitely at this level of somebody who's coming into this completely new, who's got an interest in modeling but doesn't know anything, because I'm seeing all this stuff and getting super excited too, because I know a little bit about this technology, but so very little. And I'm blown away by just watching the different things that you can do.
All right, so that was it. So I have this guy. Yeah, it started off as a spear, and I just did whatever from there. I don't know.
Just kind of
that was that guy.
Let the art
different.
That's so cool. Well, I will absolutely have links to your Patreon and all your different social media down below. Any social media you want people to have, that is.
Cool.
I'm going to, of course, give people your phone number. They need to be able to reach you. with any questions. But of course, like this is exactly what I was hoping for this series to be, and I really appreciate you taking the time and you know, imparting some of your wisdom and your experience on some anyone who's excited about getting into sculpting, like, you know, because that's where I'm at. I'm excited about this, and I could not appreciate more, you know, being able to talk to a professional artist and get an idea that, you know, this is a craft that you study and that you work on, and you know, you start at one spot and it might not be where you want to be, but it's somewhere you can move up to, and you work with it, and this is absolutely awesome.
Well, thank you. Super happy to do that. Yeah. We can do that, you know, several times. Like that's nothing for me. Yeah,
absolutely. I would love to.
I'd be super happy like to do it again. And yeah, I can't wait like to see what you'll come up with. And maybe comment on it and help you out. Like that could be a regular thing.
I would love that. I would absolutely love to. My main idea for this, and we'll see. I'm unfortunately a little limited for time because you guys behind the scenes, you don't know about this, but this is our fourth attempt to make this happen. I unfortunately work currently at a job where I am on call 24/7, and it proves to be difficult. So this unfortunately took a few attempts to get this working, but absolutely I would love to make this a somewhat regular thing. And my hope is that I will take some of the advice and some of the lessons that I've learned here and start trying to implement it in my modeling. I don't know how far I'm going to get. I don't know what I'm going to come up with, but I would love to, you know, be able to make this something that people can learn with me as I move forward. And like I said, I really appreciate the motivation and the words of wisdom that you gave today, because it's certainly helpful for people like me who are really kind of down on themselves when they don't feel like they can accomplish something. It means a lot.
Not a problem. I'd be super happy to do that. Like really, I mean, this is probably my favorite part, you know, because a lot of people have been asking for advice. Like they just contact me directly on Facebook, sometimes on Patreon, sometimes it's just Discord, and they show me like stuff they've been working on, and I'm like, no problem. I mean, you can PM me, and I can like do a bunch of draw offers and just help you out. Like it's really nice to be able to share all that knowledge again, because I used to be a teacher,
right?
And I cannot do that anymore. But you know, you have all these super passionate people. Like they love this whole 3D printing thing, and they're just a little frustrated that they can't do their own models. And but we're here now, so we can certainly help you out. Oh, I got a crash. That's fine. It saved it. But yeah.
Unfortunately, crashes do happen.
And yeah, they do. ZBrush is very welcoming when it comes to crashes. That's a good point for him. It always saves an instance of what it is you were working on, so you never really lose anything. Very good, because I was going to say that's something I recommend all the time when you're working on something in MeshMixer, because it's a pretty stable program, but you can absolutely crash it. So I always recommend saving every 5 to 10 minutes when you're working on something. Yeah. So it's cool to know that it does that for you. But awesome. Well, I thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome, and I am very, very excited about trying to get into this again in the near future. Cool. Well, I hope to see what he'll come up with very, 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 very soon. Then we'll see. Don't get too excited. We'll get too excited. I'll get there at some point. But yeah, I mean, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate it. No problem.